Buy now, pay later companies have been cementing themselves as a top way to pay for your purchases, allowing customers to pay less right away but still get their items up front, and then instead they pay over time with no interest. And on the surface, it seems great. Who wouldn't like the idea of buying the things you want for less money, and then instead being able to pay it off over a few months with no interest? Well, that's not really the full story. There's more to buy now, pay later, or BNPL than people think. But what's interesting about trends or just new things that really take off all at once, just like BNPL really did during the pandemic, is that people kind of skip over the whole research part on if it's actually something that they should really be using. If all of a sudden everyone's doing it or promoting it, then it's all good, right? And a lot of people seem to feel completely fine promoting these companies and just in general this way of paying because it can be fine for some people. If you choose to pay later, as long as you do make all of your additional pay installments on time, then there's technically no catch. But in reality, a lot of people don't get off with no catch. In reality, we live in a world where 56% of Americans aren't able to cover an unexpected $1,000 bill with their savings, and 50% of Canadians are within $200 of not being able to cover their bills at all. So that means that for more than half the country, although BNPL might feel like a way to stretch your money, it's actually causing people to be at risk for being on the hook for high interest charges, making people's already concerning financial situations even worse. And now, buy now, pay later has actually become even more dangerous, but we're gonna get into that part in just a few minutes. First, please give this video a big like down below because it really helps out the channel and we really appreciate it, and then we'll jump into it.
Okay, so to kick things off, something that's really crazy is that the way that these companies actually make money from allowing buy now, pay later options is overall based on people overspending and making poor money decisions. Now, the way that the BNPL companies themselves actually make the big money is based on people not being able to pay off their purchases on time. So if you really think about it, the process itself, of course, isn't built in the consumer's best interest. But let's explain how that actually works. So some of the main BNPL companies are ones that you've probably already heard of at this point. So that's Afterpay, Affirm, and Klarna. Now, what they're really doing when you see those little tiny letters just as you're about to check out your shopping cart, what they're doing is they're giving you these short-term loans that let you pay off your items in usually 4 payments over a period of several weeks. And as of right now, it looks like the average is around 6 weeks. Basically, you sign up for an account with a specific BNPL platform, you give them your name, your social security number, they do a little credit check, and then boom, you're in. Now, typically what'll happen is you'll pay 25% up front, and then the additional 3 payments will come every 2 weeks after that until you've paid off whatever it is that you bought, just to give you guys an example. So what's funny is that this part sounds super straightforward, right? But here's what's actually happening in the back end. The reason that these loans are interest-free is because the BNPL company charges the store, or whichever company selling you the product, a really high transaction fee. So you know how it costs the store more money to actually accept a credit card than it does cash? And once again, for those of you guys that didn't know this, yes, the store actually has to pay Visa, MasterCard, and the rest of them so that you're actually able to go out and, swipe your card and pay. Like, I'm sure you guys have been to those smaller stores who just won't even accept credit cards at all, right? The reason being is because it actually costs them more money. Now, something to keep in mind here is that credit cards have notoriously been the most expensive type of transaction for stores up until now. What's happening now is that the BNPL companies are charging anywhere from 4 to 6%, which is around double the typical credit card charge. Overall, that's one way that Afterpay, Affirm, Klarna, and the rest of them are making their money, through transaction fees charged to the stores so that they can offer this service to literally all of us. Now, if you're like me, you're probably wondering why, literally, why in the hell would these stores ever be willing to get charged double the price? And you know what? That's kind of the interesting part, right? It's because even though each purchase costs the store more, when people pay with the pay later option, they actually end up spending more money. The strategy is that people basically buy things that they otherwise wouldn't because things feel less expensive. Like, for instance, if one shirt is $100, but I could use BNPL and get 4 shirts for $100 today, great. Even though that's really a lot more money down the line.
And if you're thinking to yourself that people don't really do that, of course they do. Now, it's not gonna be as simple as buying 4 shirts instead of 1 all the time, but according to Klarna themselves, consumers actually spend an average of 45% more when they choose a pay later option. Now, this is literally how they market themselves to stores. They say, allow customers to pay with us, then even though you're gonna pay us more, the customers are gonna buy more, and then you end up making more money at the end of the day, which is a win for them. Now, we even did a poll on our Instagram page earlier today to see what you guys had to say about this, and 42% of you said that they did spend more money than they would have if they didn't choose to pay later. And what I also find really interesting is the consumer mindset here. Now, we read countless different arguments online about people saying how they use buy now, pay later options because it's better to have the extra money, or because they'll use the other money in better places until they end up paying off the purchase. Now, even in our poll again, 29% of people said they wanted to keep more money and use it elsewhere. Now, realistically, 2 weeks or even up to 6 weeks isn't really enough time to use that money to invest it or to grow it. And if you're aiming to do that, keep in mind that it's really risky. And even more than that, people just don't do that, according to countless different BNPL studies. Instead, they keep spending more, just like Klarna advertises that they will. So the stores and the companies that are selling us products want consumers to spend more money. And that's even why they allow people to pay later in the first place, even though they're going to be charged more money themselves. But how do the buy now, pay later companies actually profit? Now, one way is obviously from those high transaction charges that we mentioned before, but that's not how they make the big money. That actually comes from something else that, once again, hurts the consumer. Now, remember how we said before that you pay 25% up front and then the additional 3 payments are made over 6 weeks? Well, if you miss a payment, that's when you're charged. And it's either interest that can really add up or with Afterpay, for example. They actually charge an $8 late fee 10 days after the payment was missed. And again, if you're thinking that $8 isn't that bad, it is if you bought something worth $50. Is it worth spending an extra $8 on a clothing item or whatever you bought? Probably not. But that's not even the worst outcome. With Affirm, instead of being charged a late fee, it says that instead late payments can impact and lower your credit score. Now that's a lot more impactful and not worth it than the $8 is. And that's a big part of BNPL versus credit cards. It doesn't build your credit score up like credit cards do, but it could potentially hurt your credit score and bring it down.
So even though the option to pay later might feel like a win for anyone who's just out here buying things, the real winners by far are the BNPL companies and the stores that are getting you to buy more things. Now, this doesn't mean that the consumer isn't ever gonna benefit from paying later. We actually saw this one article that talked about using an installment plan to pay for those one-off emergency purchases. Like, for example, let's say you have an emergency fund, and once again, that's awesome, but an emergency purchase comes up like having to buy a new oven. That's obviously gonna be pretty expensive, and even if you have the money in your emergency fund, you might choose to do a pay later option to have that money still sitting in your account for 6 more weeks in case anything else happens. And now in this case, you'll have the money to pay it off without having to worry too much. It's just more of a precaution. What is crazy though is that even though I just gave you guys this like really great practical one-off example, this still isn't how most people are using the service, right? Like the majority of BNPL purchases are on clothes and for things that are for around the house. And what's interesting is that on top of people not using it in a way that's actually gonna be beneficial to them, young customers specifically are now using multiple buy now, pay later accounts. And think about it this way, if you're buying multiple items every month and all of a sudden you have 5 different installment payments coming out of your account, it's gonna get hella confusing and hard to keep track of all of them pretty quickly. Overall, the only time that BNPL is truly a benefit to you is when you can actually afford what you're buying, and if you're not using it as an excuse to just keep buying more things, something that obviously involves a lot of self-discipline. Now, something new that's happening with buy now, pay later is that there's a lot of conversations around actually regulating the industry. Right now in the US specifically, there's no federal regulations designed for BNPL. For now, they aren't completely unregulated because they are covered by lending laws that already exist, but it's likely that there's gonna be new specific regulations that come into place for this service. Now, what is crazier is that we read that having regulations might actually even help BNPL even more. If you really think about the psychology of just how people reason, basically we're gonna see a lot of people all of a sudden start to say, oh, well, now it must be safe because, you know, it's regulated. But really the reality is that there's a lot of things out there, I'm sure you guys know of some, right, that are dangerous and lead to shitty financial situations that are quote unquote allowed and regulated.
Either way, people really need to look out for these true costs that they could get charged if they are going to end up using a buy now, pay later service. And Klarna was even sued earlier this year for not warning customers about overdraft or non-sufficient fund fees. So basically, if the BNPL purchase was taken out of someone's bank account and they didn't have enough money in there, it caused their bank to charge them really high fees. Now, lesson here is that you need to look out for your own interests. Keep in mind that these companies are just trying to profit off of you. Okay, but now I also really want to make sure that we talk about how buy now, pay later services just got even more dangerous. And that's specifically with different companies like Credova. Now, this is a newer BNPL company that looks just like the other ones. Similar font, light pastel colors, looks really nice and fun and appealing. I don't know if you guys noticed, but they all kind of look the same. But this company is actually giving people the option to buy guns using these installment plans. Now, this means that they're making them even more accessible to more people, and especially to more younger people. Again, that's even part of the strategy here. They're literally trying to attract a new generation of customers by selling guns online, first of all, and then also using BNPL to get target younger people who have less money to spend. Now, you can actually check out this article here if you want to read more about this, but I think it's super interesting. And it's also an interesting visualization of how these companies can truly be a danger to consumers.
All right, guys, that's a wrap on this video. And quickly before you guys click off, let us know down in the comment box below if you've actually used BNPL before, and if you've actually encountered some like negative consequences from having used it, right? So if you've like had some late payments and what's actually happened in the event that that's actually happened to you, right? So yeah, before you guys sign off, make sure you also like down below, make sure you subscribe right there in the corner, and if you haven't seen any of our previous videos, you already know, make sure you check them out next door. We will be back, you know the vibes. Let's go.